Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Women's AM. You're tuned in and I'm your host Syra, and today I'm joined by Sister Saima, Sister Nazia, and our special guest today is Sultana Parveen. Assalamu alaikum Sultana, how are you finding the show so far?
Alhamdulillah, very good.
Well, I hear you've written a lot about racism in the Ummah, relating especially to women. What are your findings?
What are my findings? I mean, I've written a lot about racism full stop, but when I've written about women and racism, what I found is that the Muslim community, unfortunately, are not that dissimilar from the rest of the community in terms of their kind of prejudices, stereotypes about different colours and races and what have you, and that we are, unfortunately, quite a racist ummah, and we are affected by the things that the wider society are affected by, because we are part of that kind of systemic process of colonising our minds. So I wrote an article a short while ago, I think it was last year, about an American actress by the name of Danielle Watts. She was stopped by the police because she was kissing her white husband in public. She was stopped because they thought she was a prostitute. Oh gosh. So that, and then it basically went viral. So her case went viral and they were discussing it in the media. So I wrote an article talking about the treatment of black women and women of colour, even to this day, by authorities and police figures, and the way that they are still treated as though that they are just these kind of not full human beings who don't almost have a right to be kissing or touching a white man, or kind of, you know, and that could only happen if she was offering her services to him. So it was absolutely shocking, and I think it resonates with a lot of us because we know that those kind of things still exist and they are so prevalent. The attitudes about women of colour, the attitudes about race and what you define. I mean, what is blackness? What is whiteness? What do you classify as white? We use these terms so interchangeably, but who made these definitions? So I talk a lot about that in my writing because I think it's such an important topic, and I think it's so relevant, especially for Muslims.
No, definitely, I agree. To make awareness about it too. Sometimes it's overlooked racism. You just don't think it exists if it's not happening on your doorstep. Definitely. Well, I'm so glad that you're here with us today because this topic will be great.
Jazakallah.
Great to meet the sister, and I'm sure it's going to be a great discussion. So without further ado, let's go straight into her views, where we'll be talking about racism in the Ummah and how it affects Muslims. Racism is one of the many callous and challenging aspects of human behaviour that can affect people individually, as communities and as nations collectively. While many assume that living in multicultural settings may reduce the possibility of racism or prejudiced attitudes to surface, it seems to be a recurring issue within the Muslim community that is often downplayed and sadly allows disunity to flourish. While many agree that discussing racial prejudice and nationalism is a subject that can cause awkwardness and discomfort, by refusing to acknowledge this issue exacerbates the situation, resulting in problems not being addressed. Don't forget, you can join in our discussion by calling the number that will be appearing on your screens throughout this segment. You can also join us via Twitter using Islam Channel #115. So, Sister Sana, I'm going to come to you first. What is racism? I mean, that word's thrown out there a lot, but what does it actually mean?
Okay, so we could focus upon individuals who are racist. So we could talk about one group of people thinking they're superior over another group of people, but I would say that this is a shallow definition. This is a definition which is for the masses. Racism is a systemic process which is set up by systems of rule, which are basically to ensure that there's dominance of a particular group of people over another group of people in all spheres of life, not just to do with, I mean, it traces back so far. So you could talk about slavery, and what was the point of slavery? Slavery was a trade which was set up to make tons and tons of money for the European nations, to basically trade human life. So there was no regard for humanity, no regard for human life, and it was for the ends of making money and wealth and growing prosperous. The situation we find ourselves now in is those systems are still in place. Those systems have prospered. Those systems have managed to take over the world. So when we talk about racism, we're not talking about, you know, when people sometimes say, oh, at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there was racism, tribes were racist towards one another. We're talking about, you know, societies and systems and, you know, political systems which are seeking to subjugate one group of people over another in every sphere of life, culturally, in order to exist and to survive and to thrive, culturally, you know, psychologically, in all aspects of life. And I'd say that Why are Muslims racist? Because they are part of those systems. They are subject to those systems. We are victims of those systems. And to just say that, oh, we can just bring about Islam and talk about Islam in a kind of really easy way and say, no, Islam makes us not racist, is naivety to the extreme. So when we look at this discussion of racism, we need to look at it in its correct context. It is not just about a member of the EDL. It's not just a member of the BNP, you know. This discussion goes far deeper than that. So let's not focus on the individuals. Let's focus on, you know, the systems which allow people to kind of flourish in those kind of prisms of racism which exist, and the narrative, the language and the speak of racism which allows us to kind of enslave one another. I think this is the issue. We enslave one another. You know, we don't need to be. The systems don't need to do it anymore because it's worked so well. We just kind of casually racist towards one another, and we think it's completely normal.
You've given a really deep overview. I'm sure we can go straight deeper and deeper into that. No. I'm glad that you said. But Sister Nazi, where does racism come from? Sister touched on it recently. It's in history, but where does it come from?
But if I just take it back down to the individual, if we look at it from the individual point of view, the roots of racism lie with the attributes of arrogance and pride. These are the diseases of the heart, and they can impact upon the way a person thinks, the way they behave, their emotions. It can shape it. The greatest example I can give you, I mean, if you look at, for example, arrogance and pride, arrogance is the feeling of having self-importance, of considering yourself to be in a special place above others. Pride is linked to actually thinking you're better than someone else. And these were the attributes that were they were exhibited by Iblis when he said that I am better than him, Adam. You created me from fire, and him you created from clay. So we can see this kind of these feelings that the pride and the arrogance, the attributes, they have led human beings to commit crimes. One of which of those crimes, one of the sins, is racism. This is where it actually evolved from. Racism, you know, Sultan has brilliantly described the whole roots in terms of his historical, the transatlantic slavery that took place. We've even seen segregation of society. So if you look at 19th century America, there was segregation there. If you look in the early 20th century, you saw segregation through the apartheid.
In the 21st century.
Yes, even in the 21st century. So we can see where racism can take you. It can take you in. We've seen genocide of races. We've seen destruction of people. Why over something like this? And just another point, that in terms of individuals, how we see it in society, it affects us. Like women, for example, it's incredible that it is possible for you to go into a job interview and your race can have an impact on whether you get a job or not. The very physical appearance, they can look you up and down. For marriage, it can have a huge impact. In so many aspects, this is how racism on an individual level can hit you and have such a huge, profound impact.
This is what happens. Racism is an idea, and ideas control human behaviour. It's an idea that comes about when the human is not regulated by divine guidance. When the human is left to its own whims and desires, that will sow the seed for ideas like racism.
But I think it's also interesting that in the Qur'an, when it talks about the example of Iblis not bowing to Adam, that's the example that's given. You know, the first kind of transgression of Iblis, that's the one that's documented.
Exactly.
So for us, when we talk about its magnitude and its impact, we can say it's an idea, but what we're talking about is something that has controlled the world and still seeks to control the world. It's one of the most powerful mechanisms to control human beings and human behaviour.
Well, ego is a big issue. I think coming from Iblis, it is within humankind, but I think Islam tells you to curb that. Sister Sama, what's your comments on the fact that where does it rise from and how does it affect us on a daily aspect as a Muslim?
I think the two sisters have covered how it affects us, but I really want to echo what Sister Sultana said. It is one of the most strongest ideas that leads to a minority dominating and benefiting from the suffering and the oppression of others. But as Muslims, we need to go back to the example of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that beware, the oppressor needs to be aware, because on the day of judgment, his oppression will be a darkness for him. And the tafsir of this hadith is basically saying that when we're trying to cross the sirat, this is to do with believers trying to cross the sirat, which is as thin as a hair and as sharp as a blade. When we're trying to cross that, the one who oppressed another, he will be trying to cross that in complete darkness. So this is something that is very heavily condemned in Islam, and it will have repercussions in the akhirah. So I think, as the sister said, racism is something that has existed since the dawn of time, yeah, because it stems from the human nature, the instincts not being regulated. When the human nature is not being regulated and guided by the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it will give a rise to somebody taking that idea, using that idea to dominate and benefit from the oppression of others. And that is what is happening today. It's not something that existed in history books. You know, the slave trade is not something that only happened in history books and is over now. You can see human trafficking is a booming industry at the moment.
So Nazia, as Muslim women, and racism does exist, but why is there a reluctancy to talk about this issue?
I think the only way I can put it, there's serious, it's brainwashing, isn't it? The whole impact of colonial thinking, the whole impact of being told that you are inferior or a certain group is superior has just led to people now ultimately thinking this way, that they don't want to challenge it, they don't want to question it. There's no rationale behind the whole thinking by which you create one section of society that's
This is a really great topic. We have to go for a quick break, so we're going to come back to this, inshallah. Jazakallah khair for your answers there. It's been a great discussion, but unfortunately we do have to take a quick break now. So stay where you are. We'll be coming back to you in a few minutes, inshallah. But before that, here's this week's competition.
Police the same way. They put their club upside your head and then turn around and accuse you of attacking them. Every case of police brutality against a Negro follows the same pattern. They attack you, bust you all upside your mouth, and then take you to court and charge you with assault. What kind of democracy is that? What kind of freedom is that? What kind of social or political system is it when a black man has no voice in court, has nothing on his side other than what the white man chooses to give? Our brothers and sisters, we have to put a stop to this. And it will never be stopped until we stop it ourselves. They attack the victim, and then the criminal who attacked the victim accuses the victim of attacking him. This is American justice. This is American democracy. And those of you who are familiar with it know that in America, democracy is hypocrisy. We declare our right on this earth to be a man, to be a human being, to be respected as a human being, to be given the rights of a human being in this society, on this earth, in this day, which we intend to bring into existence by any means necessary.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Women's AM. This morning I'm joined by Sister Saima, Sister Nazia and Sister Sultana to discuss racism in the Ummah. Of course, we want to hear from you, so please do call into the studio with your comments or questions. The number is on your screens right now, or you can tweet us at Islam Channel, #115. Right, well, we got cut off for a quick break there. Sister Nazia, if you could finish off your point that you were saying.
No, I was just going to add another point, that there is this selective attitude as well within the community where it's amazing. They will follow certain aspects of the deen and then they will leave other aspects of the deen.
How does it affect women? Say racism in women. I think marriage is quite a hot topic at the moment.
Marriage is a classic example where obviously no one, of course they're going to consider a Muslim. Yeah. You know, they're going to want to find a Muslim for their daughter, for example. But here's the big question now. All of a sudden, isn't it amazing, the whole categorization of the potential groom has to come from a certain region, from a certain town. The girl has to look in a certain way. She has to be a certain skin color, or the brother needs to be a certain... All of these classifications, this is exactly what I mean in terms of...
It's a bit ridiculous, considering character should be the first thing that you look at. And
you can look for things like, are they from a good family? Yeah. If they're from a particular town, what kind of town are they from? Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, so you can look for those things. What the other thing you're talking about, which is what skin colour is she, and what height is she, and what kind of feet does she have? Yeah, I've heard that.
Oh, dear.
You know, does she have petite? You know, these are things which are fundamentally, you know, they are racist because their roots are to do with the view that we have of beauty. Especially for women, the view that we have of beauty, the ideas, and where do those ideas of beauty come from? They come from Western constructs. They come from white constructs of beauty. So, is she fair? You know, has she got straight hair? Has she got? If she's got like an afro, then that's not considered beautiful, is it? So, and this is the problem, you see. So. Because as an ummah, we are affected. The bar is set up by white society, and no matter which country you come from, because of colonialism and capitalism, that's the bar. We are victims of that. And so when I say that we kind of enslave each other, we don't need white people to do this. We kind of just, we keep it, we do it quite well ourselves, and we think that we're Islamic. It's just like, oh, no, but I am Islamic, but I want a fair bride for my son.
It's true, and I think it gets covered up sometimes by saying that, it's my personal preference, and personal preference is allowed in Islam, which it is allowed. But when somebody comes across and says, you know, my personal preference as a fair-skinned person is that I want to marry a very, very dark-skinned brother, your question about that, why though? You know, and your question, and you always, most of the time, get a negative response.
This concept of preference and all of that, we need to understand that psychologically we are victims of colonization. We are, you know, the coloniality of ourself is not just defined by things on the outside. Our minds are colonized. So our concepts of love, you know, what we consider romance, all of those kind of things. You know, I was reading about, you know, celebrities, female celebrities who adopt these African babies, and, you know, there was a whole thing about it, that there's all these white celebrities who've got these beautiful little black babies, and, you know, and the whole idea of that is you know, it's that kind of white saviour complex. They've gone to save the world, and so I think it kind of still manifests. This whole idea of preference, let's be real, your preference is defined by the society you live in.
Yes, absolutely.
It's not you woke up one day and you suddenly had a preference. It's been defined by that. And unless we are conscious of it, of course Muslims fall into that. And sometimes I think Muslims do it the worst because they just whitewash it with this idea of the deen. You know, I have the deen, and so therefore I'm not racist anymore. You know, I can just use a few Islamic phrases, and therefore racism has kind of gone out of the window. And I think this is the most dangerous bit, because we need to be so conscious of that, so conscious of where that comes from, and not just you know, adopt a culture which is not us, adopt a thinking which is not us, and be conscious of, you know, consciously doing that. Especially for women, if sisters are real victims of it, but they do it to one another as well. You know,
Absolutely.
You know, Simon, you were saying that, you know, when you marry and, you know, and they will say, oh, is your prospective groom fair? You know, these kind of things. That comes from women. That doesn't necessarily come from
highlight issues that are occurring, which is great. But what does Islam actually say about these issues? Because racism was at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Sister Nazia.
There was an incident once where there was a gathering, and in the gathering there was Salman al-Farsi, who was from Persia, if I translate that, and there was also Shoaib, who was from Greek kind of origins, and there was Bilal present at the time, and he was obviously African. And this man, when he entered this gathering, he could explain why the Arabs were there, but he couldn't explain their presence. So what he actually turned around and said was, if the Medinian tribes of Aus and Khazraj support Muhammad, they are his people, that is Arabs like him. But what are these people doing here? So when the Prophet ﷺ heard about this, he actually got angry, and what he did was he straight away summoned the people to the masjid for salah, and then afterwards he addressed them saying, "O people, know that the Lord and the Sustainer is one. Your ancestor is one, your faith is one, the Arabism of any one of you is not from your mother or father, it is no more than a tongue language, whoever speaks Arabic is an Arab." He also says in another narration, "Let people stop boasting about their ancestors. One is only a pious believer or a miserable sinner. All men are sons of Adam, and Adam came from dust." You know, all of these evidence, the kind of Islamic teachings, they point to the fact that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the different races, this was one of his signs of omnipotence. It wasn't something to be used as a bashing kind of thing, that I'm a better group to you, or you are, do you see what I mean? And it's the kind of thing that is pointing out to the fact that we all ultimately come from Adam, we're all made from the same mechanism, we've all got the same purpose in life, same direction, we're all going to have the ultimate same destination, which is we're going to die, we're going to face Yawm al-Qiyamah. The thing that separates us, not not these superficial things of what a person looks like, how tall they are, or what they did for their. It's their taqwa, isn't it? It's their God consciousness. These are the things that we take for value. But yet we live in a society that there are these kind of labels, there are these kind of aspirations and these kind of things that we have to aspire to. But the question is, no one ever asks who set those standards.
Yeah.
Who's the person setting these standards? Because we should be looking at the standards set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Instead, we're conforming to people, and actually we're falling in with their ideas. Why should they have the upper hand?
I think it takes a brave person to now start breaking in history books and traditions. Because I think what happens sometimes is that booming industry at the moment. You don't actually know sometimes as a child where you got this from, that
to talk about this issue.
You have this kind of like fear of another group of people sometimes that you're told as a child maybe to keep away or don't make friends,
isn't it? The whole
with certain groups of people in the playground. Yeah, you're not actually sure where you got them from. You just grow up holding that.
That information is obviously coming from somewhere. I mean, you touched on a really good point, the fact that we're all made from dust ultimately.
Has just made to people
so why is it we judge people on the
thinking this way?
They were created.
But I think sometimes it's the language. I've noticed sometimes when I'm around Asian people, and let's be honest, we are very racist towards black people. Black people, the darker you are, those are the people who suffer the most amount of racism. And I've noticed sometimes in some, and I don't understand it, even though I should because I'm Asian myself, that, you know, there's sometimes a discussion when you're talking about somebody black, people will suddenly automatically switch into saying, oh yeah, he's colour, and it's just like, I don't understand why you've just switched from speaking in the English language when you're speaking about a black person to revert back to your native tongue. What is the purpose of that? Because that's a psychological process that's going on about the way and the treatment and the view of black people.
I view that this is the mentality. It's a derogatory. Exactly. It's a mentality that's come in.
And this has come from people who are practicing. This is, you know, I'm not talking about you kind of, you know. So
well, just to conclude, then, how can we make sure that, you know, this doesn't become a reoccurring problem? What can we do differently to block this sort of racism within our community?
I think first and foremost we need to reignite the intermarrying. Yeah, we need to allow our daughters and sons to marry outside of their culture. This has been recommended by Umar bin Khattab himself, that marry outside of your tribe and your culture. Your children will be more beautiful and stronger. Which I think that's true. Yeah, I think it's great. It really does happen. So we need to encourage that more. Second of all, we need to educate our children. My kids, they're mixed, yeah, and they never actually ask the question ever in the whole of their life, why is she black, or why is she white, or what? They've never had that. Only when they went to school, then it got introduced to them, which just shows that at home which is the first school, we were never taught that. We never ever discussed this, that your dad has got light skin and your mum has got dark skin and your this has got this and you're different colour to your cousins. We never discussed this, and this is really important that we educate our children from the home and not to make this an issue. Unfortunately, though, I really want to give an example that highlights what Sister Sultana said. My father was in a mosque and he was praying. He was in the middle of the Jamaat. He actually wanted to break his Jamaat out of anger because he overheard the Qur'an teacher call over all the boys by their names, and then when it was a Somali boy he called over, he referred to him as Qale, and he called him over like that, which is a derogatory term. And my father was so angry, he wanted to break the salah. So our homes, as parents, we have to educate our children with the correct understanding that race is not an issue in Islam. It's a way of recognizing one another, period. But in the mosque, we need to address this, because in the mosque there is racism.
There's ignorance as well, isn't it? So
I don't think it's just ignorance. I think it's actually a taboo issue, and there is not consciousness about amongst Muslims to even discuss it. You cannot possibly change yourself if you are not recognising that you are, you carry racism, and unless we're real about that,
self-examining yourself and questioning.
There's no way that
Isn't it amazing? It's amazing how some people have no problems being friends with you. I've got no problems having people friends from all different communities, but suddenly isn't amazing the ugliness of the racism surfaces actually through these issues of marriage, for example. You're good enough to be a friend, but you're not good enough to be my daughter-in-law, my son-in-law, or XYZ. Do you see what I mean? And it's like, unless you stop and self-evaluate what you are doing and really question yourself, what is the intention? Not hide behind these kind of excuses, you know, like the one that you said, well, oh, this is what I find attractive. It's really rigorously questioning what's defined your perception.
That person is lower than you. That's why you don't find that person attractive.
Jazakallah khair. I think this topic's been really amazing. I'm so glad that we've touched on it. I think we could go on for another couple of episodes just on this one topic. Race and ethnicity are among the many wonders of Allah and should not be a criteria for which we judge one another, but rather should be something that fosters unity and love. Allah says in Surah Al-Hujurat, O mankind, indeed we have created you from male and female, and made you peoples and tribes that you may know one another. Indeed, the most noble of you in the sight of Allah is the most righteous of you. Indeed, Allah is all-knowing and all-acquainted. We've had a great discussion this morning, alhamdulillah, but if you've missed any of the episode, do not despair. You can catch the repeat show tomorrow morning at 6 a.m, inshallah.
In other news, 50 years ago this past Saturday, El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, better known to most Americans as Malcolm X, was assassinated while giving a speech at the Audubon Ballroom in New York City. He was just 39 years old. He would have been 90 this May 19th. Almost a half-century later, Malcolm X is still a mystery to many, if not most Americans. Although he played a key role in the civil rights movement, Malcolm is often forgotten by the mainstream media, which prefers to emphasize the nonviolent approach to social change put forward by people like the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And this is a shame because Malcolm's story and his ideas offer a fascinating look into the complexity of American racial politics, complexities that we're still trying to work through half a century after his death. Joining me now to talk more about the legacy of Malcolm X is Herb Boyd, who teaches Black Studies at the City College of New York and the College of New Rochelle, and is the co-editor of the Diary of Malcolm X, El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, 1964. Herb Boyd, welcome.
How are you, Tom? It's been a long time.
It has been. It's nice to see you again. So the common narrative is that Martin Luther King was about nonviolence and Malcolm X was maybe about violence. Is that actually the case?
Well, the thing about it is both of these iconic leaders have been largely misinterpreted, distorted. They like to freeze them in time. Dr. King, let's keep him with I Have a Dream, right? Yeah. With Malcolm, by any means necessary. And of course, that by any means necessary can be interpreted in a number of different ways. Certainly, if we're going to look at the essential Malcolm, we look at that last year and a half of his life. And it was like a very, very productive one. I mean, he spent 26 weeks traveling abroad, Tom. He was in the Middle East, he was in North Africa. He's meeting with these world leaders, some dozen or so. I mean, he's an ambassador. He's a minister without portfolio from this country. He's representing Black America. He's talking about bringing the U.S. to the world court and charging them with genocide, with the violation of our civil and human rights in this country. So he was really on a mission this last year and a half of his life.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. In the years leading up to his assassination, Malcolm X underwent a fairly radical ideological transformation. Can you tell us about that?
Indeed. I think you're talking about really an accumulative process here. It's not an overnight situation. And if you look at the essential Malcolm across the years, he kind of overcome and outgrew a number of circumstances that were very, very inhibiting. I mean, you talk about in his early years of his life, he losing his father when he's 6 years of age. His mother is institutionalized. But he overcame that, and going to a school system that denied him his dreams and his aspirations, telling him that you shouldn't desire to be a lawyer. Why don't you just focus on picking up a hammer and a saw, being a carpenter? But he transcended that, limiting him to an eighth grade education. Then he's thrown into Harlem and Boston, where he's into a different environment where drugs and robbery, the burglaries, everything. He ends up in the institution. He ends up in prison himself. But he overcame that too. And while inside prison, you've got like a caged tiger at Charlestown and Norfolk Penitentiary. So as a result of that, though, Tom, he turned inward. This whole autodidact, self-learning, self-discovery process is set in motion because he's such an energetic individual. And so we contain all that energy. Obviously, it turns inward, and he starts developing himself. He grows. And then leaving the penitentiary, thanks to his siblings, particularly his brothers Philbert and Reginald, his sister Hilda, and later Wilford, he's embraced by the Nation of Islam. But it'll come a time, and he has a kind of a rapid ascendance inside of that. He joins the nation in 1952, and by 1954, he's the national spokesperson for the NOI. And he's moving around the country and building all of these mosques. But it comes a time when he even outgrows the Nation of Islam. And by 1964-65, he's in this international sphere. And now he's in a process, he's reached a fresh new plateau of perspective. He's over there now dealing with individuals who are leading countries. So he's flying literally by the seat of his pants, you know. It's not like a Secretary of State Kerry or Secretary of State Clinton. He's got they have an entourage, a retinue of people traveling with them, feeding them all kind of briefings and talking points and background papers and everything. Malcolm had to do all of this on his own, those 24 weeks that he's traveling in North Africa and the Middle East, and parts of Europe too, later on during the Oxford Union debates that he has in December of 1964. And that's another very important stop in his life, because there you begin to see Malcolm, the kind of begin to epitomize, you know, this kind of unimpeachable integrity, this growth of his intelligence in dealing with these so-called top intellectuals in England. And he demonstrates and holds his own even in that particular environment.
Yeah, it's an absolutely remarkable story, and more Americans,
just miraculous.
Yeah, more Americans, particularly white Americans, need to learn about it. Herb Boyd, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Oh, thank you, Tom. I'll be with you again.
I look forward to it.